Well, thanks for coming in and doing this. I'm glad we're here together. I've been anticipating this conversation for, when I text you Friday.
Yeah.
Really
Almost
excited.
a week now, right?
Yeah, almost a week. And I think it's good, it's intentional. I think there's a lot of stuff that's come out that has been really powerful and important. And I think taking a step back from what we normally do right now has been important. Not just with the worship collective, but even our business is kind of like, we're gonna put this on our business page too, and we're gonna share it around. So yeah, I think it's just awesome that you're here. And I just a little backstory for everybody. We met through my wife and I randomly going into a Baptist church one weekend.
So hilarious God moment, right? I know you guys, or she had heard me speak. We did like a joint conference with different churches coming together, and we do a natural supernatural.
Yep.
And your wife felt led to come to our church. So, you know, the oldest African-American church in the city of Kenosha, Baptist, traditional, and then you guys come walking in one Sunday. And it was just a moment, man. You guys came in and we were able to connect then. And it was so interesting because the time you guys came in was literally right before we were about to transition out of that church and do something different. So the opportunity to connect with you and Stevie and build that relationship with my wife as well. And you guys even coming as we planted Acts Church through that journey for a couple of years, man, it's just amazing. But you guys walked in and I just remember that moment and Stevie said, I feel like we're supposed to be here. And I'm like, well, I want to let you know I'm not going to be here long. You know, we're in the process of transitioning. Literally like a couple of weeks, I think it was. Like it was literally the beginning of that transition of us leaving there to plant the church.
Yeah, I think it was like a month or two at the most. And we went one Sunday, and it's totally, I mean, Stevie probably had more experience in like the Baptist church than I did.
Just a Southern girl.
Yeah, being in the South. But I think we were both, it was special. There was something special when we got there. And like, we just felt an immediate connection to you, and we hadn't even really met you yet. But even to the church, like the people were just so welcoming and warm, and like Stevie was like, "This is what the South is like. I miss it."
That's right.
You know what I mean? And I was just like, man, there's something about his leadership that I'm drawn to. And I mean, we were both in tears that Sunday during worship and during the Word, and we left going, well, this is weird, but I think this is where we need to be right now. And we just kept going. And then you reached out to me and you're like, hey, don't take this the wrong way, but you don't belong here. And I was like, wait, what? And then you followed that up with, you know, the Lord's put this on my heart of starting another church, and I think that'd be
you're
perfect.
supposed to be with us. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we came and helped you start Acts Church, and we were there for almost 2 years.
That's right. And I had the privilege of doing your wedding, man, and marrying you guys and being with your family and other friends. That was an amazing day, man. It was a great day.
Yeah, it was such a refreshing, it was just such a refreshing place to be for us. We had gone through, I mean, you know, a lot of people in the area know that I've been to a lot of the churches in the area. I have a lot of relationships with church leaders in the area. And just something out of the norm for me was super impactful because it shows a side of God that you're not seeing in another church, right? Like, so it's like each local church I feel like has this little side or characteristic of God that is unique to that church.
And I think it gave an opportunity for you to heal. You know, one of the things I heard God saying as you came into our fellowship was that you needed to heal, you know? And I didn't want you to be a part of our church and feel like, oh, good, this guy's here and he's got all these gifts and we can put him to work right away. Because I didn't want it to be about what you could do, but just about you being a part of what we were doing, you know? And as God brings healing to your life to then begin to do more and more.
Absolutely.
And I know the mistake as a pastor is hard when you have needs and you recognize gifted people, because the natural thing to do is like, oh, you could help us do this, or you could help us do that. And sometimes there's the wisdom in slowing down enough to actually understand, you know, sometimes people they just need to sit and be a part of it and be loved on and be poured into so that they can develop and become. You know, so seeing you heal and go through that process, man, and now the things you're doing with business and at Journey, it's just amazing, man. I'm happy to be your friend, bro.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And that consideration is huge. I felt I think that's part of what happened, is that Stevie and I both felt cared for as individuals, not as an asset to the church.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that was just huge for us. It's like we didn't feel like we had to do anything. You know, we just had to show up, and it was just such a privilege to be a part of. And you know, obviously God led us to other things, and that's fine, but we're still so fully supportive of Acts Church.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And you and your leadership, and especially in our lives, has been, you know, like instrumental in so many things since we've been married even. So just really appreciate you.
Cool, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate you too.
Just wanted to give people a little background, a little context of our relationship, and then, you know, with all of this going on since George Floyd's death and murder, I would, you know, that's what we're saying, it's murder, obviously. But and just the upheaval of the norm in our society, you know, like where people are having a voice and being recognized, and other people are echoing that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I think the timing is good today, where it's been about a week since everything has erupted. And, you know, not that emotions have settled, but they've kind of calmed down a little bit. And I think we're kind of at a point where we can look at some stuff proactively. I think there's a lot of good information out there from great leaders across the nation that has caused us to recognize that there's an issue, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also a lot of chaos. So maybe our conversation can bring a little more order and direction for everybody. You know what I mean? And and it's outside the church form, even though, you know, we're involved in church, and we're Christians, and we love the Lord, and we follow the Lord, and we do a lot of things that way. This is more meant for the everyday person. Like, doesn't matter if you go to church, doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, none of it matters, other than this is the conversation that will hopefully bring some sort of focus and clarity to all the things going on, and, you know, all the emotions that are super high right now. So I just wanted to hear, and maybe kick this off and hear from you. I mean, even maybe we can just start from just last week and just what happened with George Floyd and how that made you feel immediately. And did you kind of see this eruption coming? And then maybe you can go back from there.
Sure. So of course, you know, that Friday, I think it was, when this video was released, honestly, I couldn't watch it all. To this day, I haven't watched all 8 minutes of that video. I just couldn't. There's such an emotional connection and pain with seeing something like that. It wasn't a shock that it happened. It was a shock to see it unravel. You know what I'm saying? And for me, it was just, you know, in that moment, it was like, well, here we go again, another one. You know what I'm saying? And the sad reality is that for a lot of my white friends, there's such shock, like, I can't believe that happened. But for those of us who are black, it's like, here we go again. You know what I'm saying? And I think the reason why this particular case has been so explosive is because it's one of the most clear-cut cases that we've seen. No matter who you are, there's no justification for watching this man for 8 minutes handcuffed behind his back with an officer kneeling on his neck. Like, there's nothing that he could have done. Even if he murdered 12 people right before that, there's no justification for what people saw. And usually the narrative is, you know, we get videos and they're grainy and, you know, it's a few seconds, and it's usually, well, let's wait and see the facts come out, right? Isn't that what most people say? Let's wait, let's see all the facts. Maybe there's something we don't know. But this particular case was so cut and dry in that it was absolutely wrong in every way. You know, it violated police procedures and protocols. Officers watched it and like, what in the world? You know, so it was such a clear-cut case that there's a degree of like eruption that happened across America, because you know, you didn't even hear the typical, well, let's wait and see when the facts come out. If anybody said that, you know, everybody looked at him crazy. You know, it's like, what facts justify what we've seen? You know, so it created this scenario that I think set the stage for people to actually come together. And I think for a lot of white people, they saw brutality maybe for the first time in a real way. And it was humanized. You know, it wasn't just this story. It wasn't just oh, this person is anti-police, like it was humanized. It's a man with a name, and for the people of faith who is connected to Christianity. He's a believer. He was connected to some movements and some churches and some stuff like that. So, for it to be such vivid imagery of police brutality and wrongful death, I think that's what helped really spark the nation.
Yeah.
And
the second one, in a matter of months,
not
necessarily related to police brutality, but just in general, like hate crime in general.
Well, you got a few different things that happened. You got Ahmaud Arbery, that video leaking. Now that situation happened, I think, like January.
Yeah.
But the video doesn't get leaked till like March.
Right.
And honestly, it was the pressure from that video being released that kind of sped up the process, because up until that point, the DA there in that town was kind of fumbling. Mr. McMichael was an investigator, I guess, for the DA's office prior, and so people were recusing themselves left and right because they felt like they were connected and that kind of thing. And so the case, in some ways, was just kind of sitting, as people trying to figure out who's going to handle it, who's going to prosecute it. But after the video was leaked, there's suddenly now national pressure to do something, and ultimately the McMichael's father and son are arrested. And then you fast forward after that, the Amy Cooper thing in Central Park, where she vividly tries to weaponize Christian Cooper, no relation, his blackness against him. And we just see it being done in a really intentional way. I'm going to call the police and tell them there's an African-American man. Like, you can see this intentionality with, once I say you're black, it's going to hide. Yeah, exactly. And then after that, then we get hit with the George Floyd case. And there's just so much. Not to mention, pandemic and quarantine, and like there's so many different things happening. I think it became the perfect storm of events. And as tragic as all of these situations are, I see it birthing something good. Like, this is the first time, I think, in the history of our country that there's been protests in all 50 states over an issue like this. And I think there's power in that. And I think it's time. I'm excited about the opportunities that will present themselves as a result of pressure, and people really coming to grasp with systemic issues and police brutality, and really what it looks like,
I think, like you said, a natural response to stuff like this is to wait and get all the facts, which most of the time I would say is wise when it's across the board. But I think something we're recognizing is that it's not across the board. That it happens when there's police brutality, or other people that are not of color, that are like white people or whatever, that aren't having to deal with these situations like this. It's quick decisions versus let's figure it all out and give them the benefit of the doubt, like we're supposed to, right? In that moment, I can't imagine that those police had the time to understand George Floyd's history, or who he was, or where he's at now. And a lot of people talk about maybe some of the things that he's done in the past and this and that. And I think, maybe Christians would have a good perspective on this. And you and I both know that we don't hold people to what's in the past, right?
And that has nothing to do with it. And you're right, though, because that's the train of thought with people. But at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with, if they caught him red-handed committing a crime, to kneel on his neck and murder him that's not law and order. That's not justice.
Right.
The police aren't hired to be the judge, the jury, the executioner. Similar with the Ahmaud Arbery case. They were, there was talk that he might have been in a property or looking in a property or breaking in or doing something. Even if he was, it doesn't justify homicide on the spot. And that's the key. And this is one of the issues with police brutality. And I've been saying this for years now, but it's reigning more relevant now. One of the issues we have in our country is that black men are viewed as more dangerous than other men. And it's a prejudice. Everything else being equal, there's this tendency by dominant culture that when you see a black man, your radar just goes up. And that's something that has been carefully developed over centuries. That didn't just happen in a vacuum. Even during slavery, the picture had to be painted that these people are animals, because it justified treating somebody as less than human. You had to create this picture that they were not human, or they were subhuman, or they were more dangerous or violent or not as civilized as other people. You had to create a philosophy to be able to carry out the atrocity that we know as slavery.
Yeah.
You know, so that mentality has kind of morphed, but it's carried over even now, handed down from generation to generation.
Yeah.
So there's this notion that black men are more dangerous.
Yeah.
And so for law enforcement officers who may not be quote unquote even racist, but when they're interacting with a black man, they're more nervous. There's this, you know, in their mind, oftentimes there's a potential that I could be harmed. You know, and the statistics show it. Black people make up 12% of the population of America, yet about 25% of people murdered or killed by police officers. And there's something to the fact that people of color, black men, are twice as likely to be killed by the police than anybody else in America.
Yeah.
And statistics prove we're definitely not more criminal than other people. So it's
Right.
not an issue of criminality. It's an issue of perception and prejudice.
Yeah, I was reading that, I think it was FBI.gov, the statistics for 2019, and the amount of, like the percentage of white men that did some sort of crime, especially murder, was actually way higher than I expected.
Yeah.
Based on what I've always heard, you know what I mean? And it's as a white, like middle class white dude growing up, you know, and I grew up in a very multicultural world, right? A lot different than probably a lot of other people, but I still, you know, I think I still, as a kid, had this mindset: if I see a black dude in an alley with a hoodie on, I'm a little more nervous than if I see a white dude in an alley with a hood on.
Yeah, all things being considered. Same
Yeah.
alley, same hoodie,
Yeah,
same time.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that is the source of all the issues, right? Is that it's an internal mindset, and it's not. I don't ever believe it to be intentional, you know, because it's generations ago that started this thing, and then you see like over the years we've had a lot of milestones, we'll call it, you know, with freedom of the black community in America is how it's always titled, right? And each one is a step in the right direction, but I think they've all treated symptoms, if that makes sense, not the issue.
Yeah.
So like even all the great that Martin Luther King Jr. did, it was very symptomatic of what was actually treated.
Yeah.
And it definitely, I would say that, you know, it definitely turned the hearts of a lot of people, right? You know, and it started to level the playing field a little bit, but it kind of just stopped, you know, and I think maybe things started to get overlooked, and people, especially me, personally, I thought, okay, everything changed then, everything's okay now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And this is what's interesting. So Dr. King was assassinated long before he could finish carrying out his agenda.
Yeah.
And we tend to remember him as is, but not understanding there was so much more that he wanted to accomplish.
Yeah.
Integration was only step one.
Right.
And even after that, as he began to kind of look toward what was next, he made the statement, and this is powerful: I fear I have integrated Black America into a burning house.
Wow.
Because integration and the end of like Jim Crow solved one problem, but it created other problems.
Yeah.
And so next on his list was poverty and the achievement gap. And the disparity between the amount of wealth in the white community versus the black community, and equality in other areas. So had he lived, he would have been able to tackle a lot of other issues in society. But because his life was cut short, we tend to see integration as the win. And it was a win, but not the win.
Right.
You know, and so that his legacy has been cemented there. But so many other things that he wanted to do. He did this amazing speech that I referenced Tuesday as well at the protest that we did in April of 1967 at Stanford University, called The Other America. And I encourage everybody to take a look at it. There's actually video footage on YouTube of the speech, and just listen to him talk about how there's two Americas, one being privileged and one being oppressed. That's the speech where the line has been heavily quoted this week, where rioting is the language of the unheard. And he says, what has America failed to hear?
Yeah.
And so in that speech, he even talks about riots.
Yeah.
And what he says is, I can't condemn riots, but then not say anything about the condition that created rioting or made people think that their only option was to lash out.
Yeah.
And so there's a dichotomy between, yes, this action is wrong, but at the same time, we have to look at what led people to get there. you know, and working through both of those things. You also mentioned some stuff about like culture and things that have been passed down and not necessarily intentional. I think you're exactly right. A lot of times there's traditions and we pass on stuff that we learn in a subconscious way without really stopping to think about like, wait, why do I think this? Why am I passing this on to my children? And a lot of that is the racial bias that we got from, you know, other generations. And the fact that many of us are taught that black men are more criminal. Black on black crime, right? That's a big thing. I posted a few days ago, black on black crime is a fictitious construct. And what I mean is this, crime tends to be about proximity and ecosystem. Statistics show that people commit crimes around the people they know and do life with. So of course, you know, you have crime is committed, most crimes are committed against people that you actually know, right? It's relationships, it's people you have tension with, that kind of thing. Crime doesn't tend to be random. So of course, where there's neighborhoods that are predominantly black, there's gonna be violence there. When people are predominantly around, you know, other whites, there's gonna be violence there, you know, and there's gonna be crime there, but it's gonna be committed in the context of your community. You know what I mean?
So much
and
sense.
so that's how crime tends to work from a sociological perspective.
I was going to ask you about that. And when I was thinking about our talk, I was like, there have been a few posts over time that you've posted that I've been like, is that true? Or like, what does he mean by that? And that was one of them recently. And you know, and I think a lot of it I'm understanding just now because I'm learning more, right? But that's a powerful statement, and it's also a very like a touchy statement, right? Because so many people talk about black on black crime now, and what you just said, I think, really set things straight.
Yeah, because it creates this narrative that, oh yeah, those black men are dangerous.
Right.
You know, they're animals, they're killing each other. You know, and even for law enforcement, you know, there's this feeling like, okay, I'm going into this community and it's dangerous and they're already killing each other. You know, it perpetuates this stereotype that black people are more dangerous than other people. You know, and it's just simply not true.
So that actually leads me to another question, and this, you know, this is probably more of the most uncomfortable question I could ask you. Honestly,
let's do it. That's what I'm talking about. Come on here.
But my perspective, like what I see and what I perceive, I want to figure out the best way to word this, but I also don't want to not word it in a way that is uncomfortable, I guess is the best part.
You're my brother, man. But, you're good. Spit it out.
But I see, okay, like I live downtown, not in the greatest area, right? I drive 22nd all the time, uptown, and it's, you know, it's just, there's a certain community there. And it's predominantly black community. And I've never had any issues, right? I don't have any issues. But I always see things like, you know, people just randomly walking across the street while cars are coming, and just all sorts of, I mean, it's a stupid example, right? But it's all sorts of stuff like that I more commonly see black people doing than I would see a white person doing. And it's only because when I recognize it, I think it's that I see black people doing it.
This is why. No, I think you're onto something. So when you talk about inner city, you're talking about poverty, right? And poverty has a culture in and of itself. American poverty, people that live it, you can find similarities between impoverished neighborhoods all around the country. And what we have to begin to do is separate poverty culture from black culture. Black people are Americans, and our culture is American culture. We've been here as long as anybody else, you know, in terms of black people are Americans. So our culture is American culture. What you experience is inner city culture, which is poverty, because white people that live in the inner city do the exact same thing. You know, people, you know, there's a culture that goes along with being in the inner city, and it embraces whoever lives there long enough. You see what I'm saying?
And that poverty, do you think that it is kind of like an internal, like a rebellion?
Well, black people are disproportionately poor. So when you connect poverty culture with a disproportionately group of people who are poor, then you kind of get the merge, and it's easy to make the assumption, well, this is how black people behave. No, this is poverty's mentality. The issue is that because of systemic issues, black people are disproportionately poorer than other people here. You see what I'm saying? So
that makes a lot of sense.
There's that intersection and connection, but it's not the same thing. It's not like black people just inherently act this way, because we've created like this subculture where we think anything that is ghetto is black. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I grew up with even other black kids. You know, if you spoke English properly, you're talking white. Like, no, I'm just not from the hood.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just what it is. You know what I'm saying? So I think more and more we have to understand that black is American culture.
Yeah.
The tragedy is we don't get to be American because anything that we do is separated from what it means to be an American, quote unquote.
And I think, you know, I was thinking about this the other day because that's kind of where my mind went is there's a class gap, you know, and like the poverty class, like you said, across the board, there's a balance of, it's even in that poverty class, it's not that people aren't working, it's not that especially now, where, you know, it's a lot harder to make decent money, everything's more expensive. Like, I'm on the verge of poverty. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's harder to achieve that, you know, middle class, and the middle class getting smaller.
Yeah.
But, you know, just recognizing that there's a balance to it. And I think when you're constantly fighting like that and working 3 jobs and still barely making ends meet, you're going to have this feeling of, like, screw the system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I work my butt off and I'm not getting anything near that guy who's, like, sitting back in his office chair all day long making phone calls.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
and there's a frustration that comes along with that.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I get that. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that it's really interesting. I'm trying to find the words here, but like, just that whole mentality of seeing that. I think a lot of that. Okay, so for me, this is the best way to put it. Okay. For me, I've never seen in my lifetime a lack of opportunity for black people.
Okay.
And that's just because I'm not black.
Right.
That's because I'm not in the community.
Yeah.
I recognize that. But I've never known that to be a problem because even black friends that I've had, they've never talked to me about it because I wouldn't get it. And I think that maybe there's always been a lack of communication because it's awkward. Like, I'm not black, I won't understand.
Yeah.
Right? And that's okay. But I'd never recognized that. But my question to you is that, do you think that a lot of the disproportionate poverty and things like that comes from the generations that had even bigger issues, if that makes sense? So like we talk about how a lot of times in the black community, like selling drugs is a big thing. You know, you see a lot of even activists now that are like legalize marijuana and bringing things like that into it, which I think is totally unrelated. I think people smoke pot no matter what color they are, and that's a different issue,
That's become
right?
the universal harmonizing factor, right?
Yeah. We're friends because we smoke weed. Yeah, no.
That breaks down all the walls.
Right. Which I guess the question is like you recognize that in a poverty, stricken place, right, or a ghetto, drug dealing and things like that are a way of life because that's the way they can make money like everybody else, right? And that's always kind of been my understanding of the reason people deal drugs in those areas because like, well, I can't get a job outside of this. Yeah. And then from my perspective, I'm like, well, you can, you just have to go do it. Yeah. Because I don't recognize the issues.
So hopelessness breeds desperation. And when you create an environment where people are hopeless, it opens the door, for all sorts of desperate activities, like selling drugs. And oftentimes there's this, sometimes you're made to believe you're less than your whole life. You watch your parents struggle. You grow up struggling. The school district you're in is, almost nothing.
Sure.
And that's a good point. Let's talk about that. The school system and the way at one point in a lot of districts, the way tax revenue is divided up for school districts. There's a connection between the amount of money being made in an area and how much money schools in that area get.
Right.
So suburban schools are way much nicer than inner city schools. Why not deregulate that and create a standard system for all schools that regardless of what part of town you're in, there's quality facilities, quality programming, quality education.
Yeah, like statewide,
yeah.
but like $1 per student.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, $1 amount per
and
student.
there's a shift to those kinds of things now. But
Yeah.
you know, in the '80s, you know, we're talking about the culture that was not the case.
Right.
You know, and so people wanted to move out to get to better school districts because of the tax revenue. It was just better school systems, and things happen in those districts and in those schools that didn't happen in other ones.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so these situations create this powder keg. So now you're in this underfunded school, overcrowded classroom. Teachers aren't properly prepared to prepare you for the world. And so you're frustrated at school. You feel like there's nothing you're gonna be able to achieve or accomplish. Nobody's preparing you to go to college. Nobody's teaching you about, you know, ACT and what you need to do to get ready for college, you know? And so this hopelessness begins at an early age,
Yeah.
you know? And then as you grow up, you continue to experience the hopelessness, and you're reminded that you're not as good,
Yeah.
you know? And a lot of people try to get jobs. You go to interview after interview after interview, and you're not hired.
Right.
And then you get to a place where it's like, you know what? You know, they're not gonna hire me.
Right.
You know, so it's the hopelessness that's built on repetition, you know, and feeling like you try to achieve certain things and it's not available, and it breeds that frustration.
Yeah.
And if we talk about the whole drug epidemic, you know, like we all know now, you know, the government was implicit. You know, the CIA records were leaked from the late 70s and early 80s that they allowed drugs into inner city communities to help pay for, you know, Cold War stuff and conflicts in Nicaragua and all these, like we're baffled when we read like this actually happened in our country. You know, like the government actually looked the other way and allowed drugs to come into the nation for the purpose of fighting a war somewhere else and that kind of thing. Like, you know, it's baffling to read, you know, those documents and those kind of things that have been released historically. And it comes across as intentional, you know,
Yeah.
to say the least. It comes across as intentional,
Yeah.
you know, and so ghettos were engineered.
Yeah.
They were created.
It's wild to even think that, because, you know, I think we're breeded through media and through the way our government is designed to think, well, conspiracies
Right.
are crazy.
Right.
And if you start looking into that, you're going to be a tin hat guy. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
waving down aliens flying by. Like, and it's wild because even now, as I look into those things, because you see a lot of it, a lot of people, especially now in the last, you know, 5-10 years, as social media has become so active in everybody's lives,
Yeah.
you see theories going.
Yeah, well, everybody's
everywhere.
a YouTube scholar now. You
Yeah.
watch one video on YouTube,
Yeah.
and now you're an expert on
YouTube
some
certified.
on some conspiracy.
Alien
man.
landings. And JFK's assassination.
Yeah, but some of the stuff you read, you know, Dr. King. You look at COINTELPRO and the FBI surveillance and subversion of the civil rights movement and the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther Party. These are FBI documents that detail the way Hoover saw these men as a threat.
Right.
And saw them unifying the black community, and his fear that if the community came together, you know, they would change and overthrow. You know, so these are FBI documents. You know, not even this isn't even the wild stuff in terms of conspiracy.
Yep.
You know, these are our communications, and so, you know, the target of the inner city and the black community at one point was intentional.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that everybody today is responsible for what happened then.
Sure.
But if we don't have a proper understanding of history and how things got to where they are, then we won't be able to change it.
Right.
And a part of understanding systemic issues is to be able to follow the trail of systemic issues from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Again, 265 years of slavery, followed by Jim Crow and segregation, followed by achievement gaps and wealth disparity and education gap, redlining. We've talked about, you know, banks colluded in cities. And if you were a black person, they wouldn't approve a loan for you to buy a house in certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
They decided black people could only live in this area.
Yeah.
And so as they forced black people into one area, then white people begin to move out to other areas.
Yeah.
And then they shift the resources from this area to those areas. Because again, now the tax revenue has moved.
Yep.
You see?
Yeah.
And so, you know, grocery stores and, you know, just services, schools, all the stuff that's new and cutting edge is not being built in these areas.
Right.
They've been built in other areas. And so you withdraw from an area, you push a people there, you withdraw resources from the area. Like we talk about uptown. If you're in uptown, there's not a grocery store within 5 miles.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, so if you don't have a car, there's not a grocery store at all.
No, I got to go to a festival.
Yeah, you got to go to 80th. You got to go to like 18th Street.
Yeah.
There's not like resources have withdrawn from an area of town, and that's a problem. So what are you going to eat? Canned food? You can only eat at like corner stores or dollar stores.
Why do you think that is? Like, I've thought about that since like the Pick and Save that was there left. I didn't really look into it or really try to understand it because it was just gone, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, it seems to be common. And I think this goes back to like maybe some of the heart issues that have created that poverty mentality that is now creating more and more crime. You know, like is that, and I'm not even saying that it's black people in this situation.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the poverty part of it. Like, I can assume that their numbers were low, maybe a lot of theft, maybe, you know, like that's where my mind goes, right?
There's no money in poverty. There's no glamour in taking care of poor people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point when we can do something else?
That's true.
Now, my understanding with the grocery store in Kenosha that was a Pick and Save, my understanding was that when they built it, the CEO at the time kind of made a deal with the mayor that, hey, I'm going to leave this store here because they recognized it was a nutrition desert. But then the company changed hands, another CEO took over, and they just didn't honor that same commitment for whatever reason.
Right.
That was kind of my understanding what transpired.
Makes sense.
The idea was, hey, this is here, this community needs it, blah, blah, blah. And so that's my understanding what happened specifically with the grocery store that was previously in Uptown.
Because the numbers aren't where they should have been.
Yeah, but there's
right?
no, you know, there's no money in it. And unfortunately, you know, there's such a pressure to not just make money in this country, but to make the most amount of money you can possibly make.
Yeah.
And it's hard to not cave under that pressure to keep pushing up profit margins and to keep finding ways to cut losses and, you know, and so things that don't seem to be the most lucrative, it becomes easy to say, well, we won't do that.
Yeah.
You know, regardless if it's actually helpful. You know, it's just not lucrative enough.
Well, it's just ingrained in our culture.
Yeah.
It's let's hold for a minute. It's getting loud out there.
One of the things, and we were talking about this before, the American culture is so individualistic. And I think one of the biggest issues we have in the United States is that we care so much about the individual. You know, the mentality is just me and mine. You get it the best way you can. You know, we have this illusion of independence, right? Sure. I pull myself up by the bootstraps, self-made. Nobody is self-made. All of us had help.
Yep.
All of us, you read a book you didn't write yourself. Somebody gave you an opportunity, gave you a job. You got an admission letter from a school. Like, we all had help to become whatever we are, right? And this illusion that it's just about me and I did it by myself and I don't need anybody else. And, you know, it makes community building difficult, you know, because people are so concerned. And all the other developed countries in the world, many of them, you just see more of a community in terms of how people interact with each other and just people's viewpoint of the world around them.
Yeah, it's like step 2.
Yeah.
People are missing step 2. Step 1 is always get to the success level that I'm looking for. And then once you get there, it's, well, let's get to the next success level instead of starting to pay it forward.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, because this actually leads me to really something that's been weighing on me a lot, and not just recently, but for months. Like, there sometimes can be such a misunderstanding or like a scratch your head moment, especially for a lot of like conservative church people, right? Or just conservatives in general, where they'll see like a Christian leader or a pastor who's pretty liberal, or even like leans like towards the socialist style of things versus the capitalist style of things that we have now in this country. And I was trying to understand where that comes from, where that lean comes from, because it's people that foundationally are pretty much the same or very close in what they believe, but how does one lean this way and one leans that way? And I started to think, well, I think it has a lot to do with how they're made, their gifts, their callings, right? Where like a pastor is a shepherd, a pastor mindset is generally a group of people, right? Which is a socialist mindset. We're going to help everybody, right? Where the kind of capitalist or democratic republic mindset is we help the individual so the individual can help themselves and then help everybody, which I understand both sides of it. But at the same time, like you're saying, we haven't gone the second step. So we're attempting to help the individual to be the individual and, you know, take care of themselves in a sense. But nobody's, you know, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, but, you know, generally speaking, we're not thinking of what the next step is in helping the people around us. And I can't say that for everybody because I know a lot of very wealthy people, independently made, that are helping tons of people. But I think that mindset is part of the problem. You know what I mean?
And it goes against human nature. All of us derive from tribal peoples of some sort, right? And in no tribe that you can document on the planet was there this mentality that, hey, everybody take care of themselves and you'll be okay. No, it was always a team. You always had, you know, men who would hunt and gather, and then women who would do this, and people had roles to play that benefited their tribe or their town. You know, and this goes back thousands of years in Europe, and you know, the town blacksmith didn't just do, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't just I'm gonna, you know, do shoes for my horse. You know what I'm saying? And charge you to the point that you can't afford shoes. You know, there was a bartering of goods. You know, okay, I'll provide horseshoes and iron, and you provide food, and you know, so the notion of community is human nature. And I think this experiment called America in some ways violates that. You know what I'm saying? In some ways, we forget that it's about community. You know, and we make it all about the individual.
It's an opportunistic mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. And as fearful as conservatives are of socialism, most of the developed world are socialist countries. You know, and it works well in most countries. You know, I think part of the issue is the Cold War. Socialism got morphed into communism, and so because in the mind of the average American, particularly conservative, there's a connection between socialism and communism, which aren't the same thing. You know, with, you know, Cold War, late 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, with Russia and that whole movement, you know, we connect any degree of socialism to that, and it morphs into something else. But just based on principle alone, it's about how do we create policies and programs that benefit the community as a whole.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And especially from a governmental perspective.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because I can definitely feel both sides of it, and I always kind of like ride the line a little bit because I'm like, well, I feel this way, but at the same time, I'm a small business owner, and if I work my butt off, you know, like, am I paying for people that aren't working their butt off? And is it going to be worth it in the long run?
Here's another misconception. Most people that benefit from the programs we have now are not cheating the system. I've been an organizer and a proponent of an organization called Bread for the World. I now sit on the board of directors and executive committee. Bread for the World is a bipartisan Christian organization that has this mission of defeating hunger. So it's all about programs that feed poor people. And so I get the chance to be in DC and working with policy people. And a lot of times politicians go talk about we're spending too much money, we need to trim the fat. And one of the first things they want to cut is like welfare programs, right? Welfare programs make up less than 1% of the total budget.
Wow.
So even if you cut it in half, it doesn't impact the budget at all.
Right.
And fraud in welfare is less than 3%.
Wow.
So we have this notion that people are getting these benefits, and the average amount of time a person is on welfare from start to finish is 18 months in America. So it means the average person that receives food stamps, welfare, are on it for about a year and a half to help pick themselves up. They get off, they go to work, and they're fine. But we're fed these sensational stories, or we're taught that all these people won't go to work because the government is taking care of them. And you do have it. That does happen. But that's nowhere near the majority, nowhere near half the people that are on these programs. For the majority of the people, these programs benefit them for a short amount of time. And all the statistics show that if you invest in people, it'll help create a better society.
Yeah.
You look at our prison system. Our prison system is strictly punitive. It doesn't reform people. And you look at other developed countries and their approach to prison. They realize when people get locked up, for the most part, we want to prepare them to come back and be a part of our society. Because if we just treat them like animals, now we have animals coming back, moving to our neighborhood,
Right.
and that's not good for anybody.
And what good did all that
Yeah, that's
do?
not good for anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and even statistics show that it is cheaper to rehabilitate people and do programs on the front end than it is to house somebody in prison. You know,
Yeah.
so after school programs, all these things that we cut because of money, that now we're spending money on in prisons.
Yeah.
It's so much cheaper to invest in a person, and your investment pays off.
Yeah.
You know, so if we
Yeah.
can invest in programs that help people, younger people, help put people on the right track, help give them a leg up, then it pays dividends because
Yeah.
it creates citizens that can provide for themselves, that can in turn give back, that can in turn pay taxes.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of the things that we're doing, it's having a adverse or backwards effect
Right.
of even what we think it's supposed to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like multiple spider webs, and you're just seeing all these things and that's why it's hard. And that's even thinking about this conversation today. I was like, there's just so much to unpack, and we could never touch it in.
Well, we don't
a day.
read. Americans don't read.
Yeah, well, that's
We look
just
at a
it. It's
news
like-
clip or watch it. We don't read. We don't
Yeah.
read. Nobody wants to
Share.
read through a policy. Like we don't read this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and so
Oh,
we just
this
take somebody's word.
contradicts that.
We
Yeah.
just take somebody's word for it and like, oh yeah, this is what it is.
Yeah.
Like read the stuff. Like, you know, it's work. Informing yourself is hard work.
It is.
It's hard work.
It
And that's
is,
why a lot of
and-
people don't want to do it.
Yeah, and there's so much that you should be informed about.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
Absolutely.
And time is something nobody wants to give up.
That's right.
It's especially now. We want things immediately.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we get where we're at. We draw a conclusion from a series of posts we've seen on social media.
Yeah, or prejudice. You know,
Yeah,
that's our own.
absolutely.
You know, based on some experience we had with somebody, we see something, and we're like, oh, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And we just draw the conclusion, and that's it. You know,
Yeah.
with no deeper development. And we're so dismissive of other people's pain and other people's, it speaks to individualism.
Yeah.
You know, we're so dismissive.
That doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
So I don't, and not
Or,
really
oh, they're just saying that. He's
Yeah.
just,
Or that
if he just go
rarely
get a
happens.
job, he'll be fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another perception I think that I've always had is like, that's terrible, but that's not a regular thing.
yeah.
You know, because I'm not paying attention to it.
Yeah.
How could I know if it's a regular thing or not?
Yeah.
And you know, it's just a crazy thing where people that I talk to are like, oh yeah, my friend just got pulled over and searched and arrested for no reason.
Yeah.
All the time.
Oh, we're
But
looking for a
me,
suspect.
Yeah.
And you fit the description. We thought, well, what's the description?
Yeah. Blackmail.
Have a good day. That's what you get. And no blackmail. Have a good day, sir. We thought you were somebody else.
Yeah, I could
it's-
never understand that.
Yeah.
Because that's never happened to me, and it probably never will. And I think that comes down to this very, you know, if you try to boil all of this down, and what can we do? And it's not simple, right? But there are a few things I think internally that we can do. And one of the things that, you know, is a principle in the Bible, renewing your mind daily. And I think part of that is, you know, that the renewing your mind actually is not just a biblical thing. It's not just some spiritual thing. It's actually a scientific, medical thing
that's
of
good.
creating new neural pathways in your brain, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to change the way you see something, you repeat this. You know, I don't see you this way. I don't see you this way every day.
Yeah.
Right? That makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
That's something for me that is changing. And one of the most powerful things for me is recognizing that I can change the way I see things. My opinion is not unchangeable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And right now, when we're living in a society where here's someone's facts, and they totally contradict each other, and you're like, well, what are the facts? Where can I find real statistics? Because this person's saying these are the statistics, this one's saying these aren't. And you're just like, I don't know what to believe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And we're in this point where it's, how can we find how can we find what to believe and renew our thoughts in that and say, this is the truth?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of credible research. A lot of universities do a great job of doing case studies and research, you know. So it comes with just doing your homework. And especially for white people, you got to get past the point of just asking your black friends to explain systematic racism to you.
Yeah.
And actually read.
Yep.
There's some very well-documented scholarly material that lays out the historic time frame, you know, that really paints a very vivid picture of laws that were passed, you know, of all these different things that have taken place over a period of time that has led us to where we are now in terms of race issues in America. And so you got to do your due diligence. If you're sincere about understanding these things, it's not just asking people questions. You know, it's reading. You know, there's a scholarly approach to all of this. And even as an African American person, like as a black man, I knew some of this stuff existed. But as I began to read certain books, I began to understand, like, oh man, you know, this law was passed in this time, and this was the impact of that, and this is what happened. You know, it really began to connect the dots in a more scholarly way. You know, not just I feel oppressed. You know, it's you know, there's a depth to it. It's systemic. There's a system to the way things were put in place, and the issue is that system has been perpetuated through culture over time. Yeah. You know, and so there's things that happen that are almost subconscious to this point because it's been going for so long. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And you don't always know where it started because those things have been silenced. Yeah. Right? And even back to your point of a lot of the things that happened, you know, in earlier this century or last century.
Right.
Wow, 20 years.
Bruh, don't even.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't know what the motivation was for some of that stuff because nobody really said it. You might find documents on what happened, but the motivation could very well be, you know, somebody thinking, well, we treated them this way for so long. If they gain power or gain control, this might ruin everything.
Certainly there's evidence that's what J. Edgar Hoover thought, the FBI. Yeah. You know, if these groups come together, they could overthrow America. Yeah. You know, there was definitely some paranoia, you know, when you read some of those older FBI documents that have recently been released.
And do you think that comes from guilt and shame, maybe?
No, I think it goes even further back. I think it's the foundation of this country. The Bill of Rights, you know, that we love so much, Constitution, it wasn't written for us. White men that own property, that's it. Yeah. You know, the forefathers of this nation, as they were putting together these documents that would become America, it was only for white men that owned property. So poor white men weren't included. Yeah. Women weren't included. Black people weren't included. Other minorities weren't. You know, so the bedrock of our country was designed for one specific group to prosper. They only considered themselves at that time. You know, and I think one of the disservices we've done is we remember history in a way that's not authentic. You know, I mean, you look at, you know, growing up like Columbus Day and all these things, like we've romanticized our own history in a way that hasn't been helpful for our nation. Yeah. You know, and I look at a country like Germany that has such a horrific tinge to its past, you know, with Hitler and Nazi movement, but how they've owned it, repented for it, and then built a strong nation in the aftermath of it. Yeah. And I think America needs to do that on some levels.
So how do we change that? Like, not just okay, I've changed my mind, you know, or I've recognized, but how do we change the Bill of Rights, you know, being written for those people?
We can't change that, but we can act differently in light of the knowledge of it. And I think it happens when we focus on changing culture and changing policy. Culture, you know, water cooler talk, the things that we say to our kids. Yeah. Be careful over there on that side of town. Don't such and such. Hey, why don't you go play with these kids? Yeah. You know, culture. So part of it is culture. The other part is policy. You know, there are certain policies that are more discriminatory. For instance, when you really get into and study mass incarceration and why there's such a backlash against how the prison system works. Some of the drug laws, the 1994 crime bill, the 1998 drug laws that were passed, or 1988 drug laws that passed, really cripple inner city, impoverished people in some serious ways. So one of the discrepancies that we see is with incarceration. and what we see as unfair sentencing practices. Crack cocaine carries a heavier sentence than powder cocaine in general. And we're talking equal amounts, right? Powder cocaine is a suburban drug, more of a drug for people with resources, more expensive. Crack is a condensed, stronger, cheaper form. And so basically what that means is a poor person with crack cocaine is going to get more time than a slightly more affluent person with powder cocaine. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's those type, and I get, if you're a criminal, you deserve to go to jail, you shouldn't have drugs.
Sure.
Right, you shouldn't sell drugs, period, right?
Right, nobody's condoning that.
Yeah, right, but the issue is that the drugs that poor people use, you're gonna get more time if you get caught with those drugs versus drugs that tend to be what more affluent people would use.
Right.
And that's a disparity in our legal system.
Because those people have more to give to the system.
Yeah, or people from certain neighborhoods, suburban individuals, when you go to court, you're gonna get sent to rehab. You got resources. If you got a drug problem, if you're poor, you're going to jail for having a drug problem.
Yeah.
So it's
because you can't get in to find the help you need.
Yeah, and so those types of disparities, help to kind of lead us to where we are. And those are just a couple examples of kind of systemic things with how it's done. Even the 3 strikes law, with you get any 3 felonies, you go to jail 25 to life. All of these kind of things were used in a way that was predatory. Like we saw a big, even commotion with stop and frisk. And a lot of people in New York at the time, New York had one of the highest murder rates in the nation. And so they enacted this stop and frisk where police can basically stop and search people for any reason, no reason, whatever. They basically had the green light because there was so much gun violence. And then in hindsight, you see how that opened the door for racial profiling? Because it was basically like, hey, look at this black guy. You look like you're guilty of something. Come here, let me pat you down.
Yeah.
And so you literally had NYPD just patting down black dudes, roughing them up. And it created this green light with no evidence, no anything.
Yeah.
And so racial profiling was connected to that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's been interesting because there's been a lot of like really, really great documentaries and TV shows coming out and movies, and obviously a lot of them are, somebody wrote about something that happened, so it's maybe not all the facts, but I think a lot of people watch these things and they get outraged about stuff.
Yeah.
And then it stops there, or they develop a new thought pattern, right, about that situation, and I'm more the type of person that watches it and I'm like, holy cow, and then I go start to read what actually happened.
Exactly.
And, like that, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like that. But it's amazing. Like even the story of like the Central Park 5, that documentary on Netflix, or
How They See Us.
Yeah, How They See Us.
Yep.
So powerful.
Yeah.
That whole thing was so powerful. And I went and looked and read and watched interviews and rabbit trail. That's kind of like what I do. But it helped me recognize what happened, and a lot of the things that you're talking about now, like these things are still affecting us today, even though they might not be as obvious, right?
Absolutely.
It's just wild, and it's one of those things that I feel like we have an opportunity now. We have a week that has been in uproar and completely, like I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime.
Neither have I, man.
Right?
Neither have
like
I.
Most of us haven't.
Yeah.
This has been wild. And I would say that everybody is involved in the conversation, whether they're being helpful or hurtful.
Yeah.
Everybody's involved in it at some level.
But we got a chance to make a difference now.
Yeah.
And if you follow the movements for equality in our nation, they tended to be effective whenever black and white people came together.
Yeah.
When you look at the abolitionist movement that helped to abolish slavery, of course there were free black people that were part of the movement and escaped slaves, but there were white people that were outraged by slavery as an institution.
Yeah.
And together they began to pioneer and push and get to the place where slavery is abolished. When you look at the civil rights movement, it wasn't just black people that were in an uproar about segregation. There were white people as well. And so we see, videos and pictures of, Dr. King and the civil rights movement and the sea of different people and even white people marching as well.
Yeah.
And I think now we're ripe for that type of movement again, in the sense that for maybe the first time in a long time, white people are like, man, did I get this wrong?
Yeah.
Are there really things going on in our country You know, is this really an issue?
Yeah.
And beginning to ask the question. The governor of California, I think it was, made a statement that I wholeheartedly believe in. He said, white people started racism, and we got to take the initiative to finally end it.
Yeah.
You know, like these institutions were created, the situation was created, you know, by white people, Europeans that had come to this quote unquote new world,
Yeah.
and set these things in motion.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's not a black problem.
Yeah.
It's not a liberal Democrat problem. That's another issue. We overly politicize justice issues,
Yeah.
and we make it Democrat versus Republican.
Yeah.
And it's not that.
Yeah.
Injustice is a bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
Period.
Absolutely.
Racism is a bipartisan issue. It has nothing to do with what side of the aisle you're on.
It has everything to do with humanity.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
human issue.
Yeah.
You know, and basic human dignity and rights. So.
And that's something that we talk about a lot, even like in our business and how we market. You know, it's how we communicate a message. And
Yeah.
that message needs to be communicated recognizing that there's somebody, a person on the other end of that message, right? Where I think marketing too has a lot to do with the way we see and hear things in commercials, in TV shows, movies, media in general. We have, you know, I was just telling my parents, my family, and not that they didn't already know this, but between the pandemic and all of that's going on right now, addressing social justice issues, racism, things like that, when you're seeing videos, there is somebody behind that has a certain narrative in their head.
Yeah.
So when you're, like all of the things that you're seeing, this is why it's so important, like you were saying, to do the work, do the homework, learn this stuff, because you might be seeing 5-10 seconds of something that happened, and that person that was filming it either stopped and walked away and didn't see the whole thing, or came late, or they have a certain thought process in their head and they're like, look at this is stupid, and then post it everywhere.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like for us, when we're hired to do video work, what we get is a paper document usually that says, this is the target audience, this is the message, and, you know, we're gonna film this to all go into this message.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's what you need to do, otherwise the video is pointless.
Right, but we got to understand that though when it comes to people and the things they post.
Yeah.
Because we'll accept somebody's perspective, like you said, from a 5 or 10 second clip, and then build our whole thought process around it.
Right.
You know, to justify or debunk, depending on, you know, what side of the topic or issue that we're on.
Yep.
Yeah, we got to begin to see the truth as something other than that.
Yeah, I think right now we've had, you know, like we talked about earlier, we've had an explosion, and the things that we've stood on, the cultural things, they're like falling apart. They're crumbling.
Yeah.
The things that we've always thought about our society is being ripped and flipped upside down, and that is awesome.
Yeah.
It's a great thing.
Absolutely.
And you know, I used the analogy earlier of like having a fire in your backyard, and then you're like, well, I might as well just burn all this garbage that I have, or like, you know, the cardboard that I had here, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that now is a point where we have to pay attention and be careful with what we're sharing, what we're posting, what we're doing.
Yeah.
Know what we're doing before we do it.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten loud. Everybody sees the issue. We've done the job, right? As far as communicating that there is an issue.
Yeah, well, there's an openness to it now.
Yeah.
You know, people see it in such a flagrant way that they're beginning to ask really important questions.
Yep.
And let me say this, when you talk about this explosion, I want us to separate some things. You know, I want to separate protesting and rioting and looting. Because I've been reading articles and these protesters are burning. Protesters are not, looters are.
Yeah.
And there's a difference.
Yeah.
Protest is civil disobedience. Whether you're marching, whether you stand in the intersection, you know, whether you show up at some location, you know, it's a social disturbance to bring awareness to an issue. That's a protest, legal right to protest.
Yep.
Rioting is born out of anger and frustration. And it's an unhealthy explosion of pain about an issue.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
it's people that are hurt and upset and frustrated and don't know what else to do other than to break stuff.
Yeah.
Looting is more of an opportunistic, in the midst of chaos, you know, I can get ahead by stealing X, Y, and Z.
Finally get these new shoes.
Yeah, right. I can get the TV for the den now. You know, it's like, so they're all different things. So number one, we need to make sure we don't put them in the same category. And number two, with the same energy we condemn rioting, I want to make sure that we condemn the reasons people are rioting.
Yeah.
Because what tends to happen in America is we get so focused on how somebody or how people choose to express themselves that the whole reason gets lost.
Yeah.
I personally don't condone rioting. I don't think it's going to get us where we want in terms of change.
Yeah.
But I understand what led people to the point where they at least felt like there was nothing else they could do.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Absolutely.
And that's what we have to do. I don't want the message to get lost
Yeah.
in the methodology of how it happens. And again,
Right.
I don't condone rioting, but I understand the pain of over and over again
Yeah.
trying other ways,
Yeah.
crying out, and just being tired of feeling like you've been taken advantage of and abused.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, America owes Colin Kaepernick an apology. The NFL does. And I know there are people be mad when I say stuff like that. It's the American flag. He took a knee to protest injustice. That's what he did. He didn't write a manifesto saying he hated America.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, he had several conversations with family members that were former military as he strategized what gesture he should do to speak up on issues.
Yeah.
So military people were involved.
Yeah.
And people who are in the military didn't fight to respect the flag. They fought to preserve the ideal of America. And in America, we have a right to protest and speak out against certain things.
Yeah.
So we talk about our military protecting freedom. It's a freedom to speak out on certain things.
Yeah.
So yeah, the NFL, I've seen they've come out with some statements about injustice. I hope soon they offer an apology to him because they made him, the scum of the earth because he made a decision and it cost him his whole career.
Yeah.
And all he was doing was bringing awareness to an issue.
And I don't think people recognize that.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. The point of protest is to disrupt.
Yeah.
So you don't do something, like if you do something everybody thinks is PC and it's great, it's not a protest.
Right.
So that's why, and again, I'm not advocating for any violence or anything that's going to be destructive. But protesting is always a disturbance.
Yeah.
Crowds of people marching through the street, people standing for freedom. Any group of people that protest, there's always some dramatic, disruptive way they choose to protest.
Yeah.
Because that's what protest is.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that's the,
Well, and I
you
think
don't
a
want
lot
people to march, you don't want them to kneel,
Yeah.
you don't.
So what are they supposed to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think that people are going to have to take a second look at a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to help shape their clear view
Yeah,
of it. You know
absolutely.
what I mean? Where, your immediate reaction to somebody like Colin Kaepernick has everything to do with everything we had talked about already.
Yeah.
Right? But now that you're starting to recognize,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that looks different to you.
That's right.
And maybe
Yeah.
you need to go look at it. And
Yeah.
maybe if you were the one like bashing him all over social media, maybe you do owe an apology.
Yeah.
There's certain steps I think you have to take where it's not just, okay, from this point forward, this is how I'm going to look at it. You also have to go from this point backward, I'm going to look at that again.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
I wanna
now this has
reevaluate.
changed all of that.
That's right.
To me. And I think that's super important for people to get. And also, I think that has a lot to do with, I see a lot of people using the word empathy right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding of the word empathy is I feel what you feel. And that's like the basic construct of it. The difference between empathy and sympathy is empathy is I'm putting myself in your shoes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Sympathy is saying I feel bad for you, essentially.
Yeah.
Like I'm with you. I'm here for you.
Gotcha.
I feel bad
Absolutely.
for you, right? So I think I kind of want to put a voice in there that says I could never actually have empathy for you.
Well, I mean,
In the sense that
Well,
I can't put myself in your shoes
I mean,
fully.
but that applies to any situation. I think empathy is like more metaphoric. It's a posture
Sure.
of a humility of understanding and trying to imagine what you've dealt with
Yeah.
as a way to connect. So I think that's with any situation, unless it's a situation you've actually gone through yourself.
Right.
You can never identify. And even if it's the same situation, how two people internalize situations is different, right?
Right.
So I don't have a problem with empathy because it speaks to a willingness and a humility in trying to understand in a very, very deep way. So I don't take offense of that.
That's
Some people
that's
are
exactly.
offended. Yeah, so for me, it's like, I understand, try to wrap your mind around it from an imaginary perspective of how you would feel, you know, and that would at least give you a glimpse of what my life is like.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. And I can't remember his name now, but he was the music director for Elevation. He is the music director for Elevation.
Okay.
And he's black, and he went on Instagram Live the other day, and he said, if, like the basics of it, he's like, I don't know, but what might help is if you tried to understand.
Yeah.
I know you can't understand, but if you tried. Yeah. And he equated that to God's grace.
Yeah.
And how we try to understand it, we think we understand it, and then there's a whole new level of it, right? And it just keeps going and going, and we'll never actually understand the fullness of God's grace, but we'll understand it in each situation.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that empathy, that's what I'm getting at, is like, I can't say that I actually empathize.
Yeah.
I can say that I'm trying to, and I will never stop trying to.
Yeah.
I'll never stop trying to understand. And I think that's part of what we need to do, is that trying, because you will break through certain understandings, but unless I could change the color of my skin, I will never actually fully, truly understand what you've gone through in your lifetime.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely. There's a post going around on like Instagram, Facebook, social media that I think is pretty cool. And the post says, it's not black versus white, it's everybody versus racism.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And I think that's the posture. That's what our country has to move toward.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not about guilting white people into anything, but it's taking a serious look at the cultures and policies and systems that we built in America, and how they facilitated disparity. And that's the reality of it, you know. And then how do we break them? How do we change? Where do we change? And how do we move forward as a nation? You know, that's everything right now.
And how do we not just make a bunch of noise and then let it die?
Yeah.
And that I think is right now what we're talking about, and what's going today, what's happening. What's next? What's next for us? Like, what is the next step? Proactively, I've seen 40 things you can do to be involved or to change it. You've seen, here's the top 16 ways you can help, and whatever it is. And I think that can be overwhelming for a lot of people. And, not that we shouldn't take the time to look into these things, but in general, I would ask, what do you think, as far as this community right here? Like, this is going live on the Kenosha Worship Collective. It'll be live, obviously, for other people on our Isley page, but which is a vaster audience. But I think it applies community, smaller communities. I mean, the most effective thing, the most impact we can have is within our community locally. So what do you think are a couple, major things that I could go do tomorrow or in this election this year or whatever?
I think it's both individual and collective in a sense. So on an individual level, do your research, read some books, begin to understand systemic issues and the challenges in Black America and why they exist for yourself. Also begin to diversify relationships. If you don't have people of color in your friend group, make some friends. Be honest and intentional about why. I want to live a life that's more multi-ethnic, and I want to invite other people in this space, and be open about doing that. Don't pretend it's something that is not. But begin to build authentic relationships so you can understand people from a different place, a different perspective. So that's kind of the personal, individual. On like the collective side, I say start locally. Because when we look at like the federal, national level, can be so overwhelming. Many of the policies that impact day-to-day people happen locally. So look at policing. Go on the website for Kenosha and look at the agenda for the Common Council and begin to look at what the alder persons of our city are voting on. What are those policies that are coming forward? What are the decisions that they're making concerning our city? And start there. Start to look at policing policies and the use of force policy for the state of Wisconsin. Begin to look at on the local level those individual specific things that we can change here. for me, it's all about starting local.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
good.
putting teams together and doing some things to really assess the systems in Kenosha. You know, take a look at how justice works here. Talk to DAs, talk to judges, and all these things are happening because there's a window now. You know, we begin to get calls from the mayor and other people that really want to take a serious look at these issues and to evaluate how we're doing as a city and what things that we need to change.
Yeah.
So there's an openness to do that, and myself and a bunch of other people are going to be working to do that in the near future. But this situation has created the opportunity for people to really take a serious look, and it's opened the door for us to get some things done.
And to be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, so policy, pay attention to what's going on and how to vote. And voting is not just November. You know, the presidential election, of course, is important, but local elections, state reps, alderpersons, county board, sheriffs, like all of those, mayor, all those elected positions, engage with those individuals.
Yeah.
Find out what their platforms, their ideas are. You know, the county executives, the DA, find out what their plans are, because a lot of this stuff is published. It's on their websites. You know, you can get information about what the individuals that lead our community, you know, our city stand for, you know, and what their thoughts and ideas for the future of this, of our city.
Yeah.
And always ask this question, and I think this is going to be key. How does this policy impact the less fortunate people in my community? Because so often we connect it to what we think and what's going to be best for us.
Yeah.
You know, if they do this, it's going to help me. Well, how does that impact other people, though?
Yeah.
You know, because we got to begin to make choices about policy based on our city and other people, and specifically underprivileged people. You know, how is this going to impact them? You know, because for some of this stuff, it's like, I'm going to be all right. You know, I'm established. I've got X, Y, and Z going for me already. How will this impact? Will it hinder people? Will it help people? How does this impact other people?
Yeah.
You know, particularly those that are the least, those that are impoverished, those that seem to have the most struggle in the world.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good, man. Yeah, I think it's good. It's just such a wild time.
Absolutely,
It's such a
man.
wild time.
Absolutely.
And, you know, like we said before, there's so many things, the pandemic and all these things,
Yeah.
there's just a rise in emotions and reactions to things and stuff like that. And, you know, I think in the end, there's a couple things, even just from off the top of my head, even on social media, like getting to a point that we're not so concerned about our image and reputation,
Yeah.
that we're willing to say things that people might not like. You know, like, and even in this conversation, some of the questions that I've asked you are just prejudices that I know in my head from white people. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That it's going to make some people uncomfortable,
Yeah.
whatever. But I think that's important. We need to stop being comfortable.
Well, we got to embrace the awkward,
Yeah.
you know, and having awkward conversations with people. And even as a black man, allowing white people to get it wrong and to say stuff to you that might sound dumb
Yeah.
or sound offensive, that's creating a safe space for people to talk and ask questions and say things.
Yeah.
Because of the trauma of what it means to be black in America, sometimes it's hard for us to create that safe space for other people.
Yeah.
You know, but part of the individual side of it is as you develop relationships, to create that safe space.
Yeah.
You know, to not be offended so easily,
Right.
especially by people that are genuinely trying to understand.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And I think that goes both ways, that we have to recognize the hurt enough to know that there's some people that are not going to react well to us
Yeah.
just walking up and be
Yeah.
like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's
like
true.
it's just going to happen. And I don't think that should deter anybody from taking the step anyway.
So from a Christian perspective, I was just having this conversation. I liken it to sharing the gospel. You know, we have a passion to share Jesus with people.
Yeah.
And we understand some people won't be open to it.
Yeah.
But we don't stop sharing Jesus. You know,
Right.
like there's always moments in all of our Christian journey where we try to share Jesus with somebody and they're just not interested.
Yeah.
You know, and we back off and we keep going and we look for other opportunities with other individuals or whatever. We've got to approach racial reconciliation and building multi-ethnic lives the same way.
Yeah.
You know, like I might approach or talk to somebody or have a conversation with somebody, we have a commonality, and they're just not open.
Yeah.
Okay, you know,
Yeah.
on to the next. I'll find somebody else, and eventually you'll begin to find a community, put together people, you know, that are open, that do want to build, that are interested in creating actual meaningful friendships, you know, that cross kind of those ethnic lines.
Yeah, that's good. Well, anything else that you want to say or you're thinking or?
I think we're good, man. I'm excited. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
me too.
Yeah, I think a door has been opened
Yeah.
for us to begin to bring about change,
Yeah.
and I'm excited by that.
That's awesome.
So yeah, man.
Are there any resources off the top of your head that you want to share with people, maybe locally, that are going on, that they can look at, connect with, whatever?
Right now, I would say stay tuned. I think there's some organizations that are going to be birthed out of this moment,
Yeah.
and some things that take further steps. I think there's a great organization in Kenosha called the Committee for Dismantling Racism. And what they've been doing in most recent time is hosting courageous conversations. So it's different points in the city, usually downtown, where they have these conversations, people break into groups, and it's an opportunity to talk about issues of race and justice and that kind of thing. So that's pretty cool. I think they have a Facebook page and that kind of thing. But I anticipate some other organizations and movements that are going to be birthed just out of this time together. So stay tuned. Read some books.
Yeah.
You know, I recommend reading White Fragility. I think is a great book that articulates kind of understanding white privilege and what that actually means, what it is, what it isn't. Divided by Faith is another great book. It's a book written by a sociologist about the church and the connection between race and church in America. So it's kind of historic, but it paints a beautiful picture in terms of, you know, it goes back to segregated churches and it's a beautiful book called Divided by Faith. So those are two books. Just Mercy, the book they made the movie out of, is another really good book. It's a narrative, it's a story about a man on death row wrongfully accused in his fight because of being black. So there's so many resources that are available just in terms of educating. The New Jim Crow, that's another good one by Dr. Michelle Alexander. That's a book that details mass incarceration and it builds a premise that the Jim Crow South morphed into mass incarceration and this justice system that would overly incarcerate people of color. So it's an interesting book.
Yeah.
A lot of data about prison populations, laws, like some of the stuff I referenced, I just kind of breezed over it.
Yeah.
But that book is going to give detail and credence to case law and studies and you know what laws actually did what, and it's a brilliant read.
Yeah.
But it deals specifically with mass incarceration.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good.
Cool.
Yeah. I would just, before we end this, I would just want to encourage everybody that's watching, if you felt some sort of reaction to anything that we said, go do the research.
Yeah.
Look into it and find that information for yourself, because I think it's going to be important rather than commenting and going
Everybody be in my
crazy.
inbox.
Yeah.
You said this.
Yep.
You said we should be a socialist and not a cap. Listen, do the research.
Yep. And then just lastly, defend the character of the people you know.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about this earlier. Somebody came after you, and it boiled me up, and
Oh my goodness,
started going
man.
through the community, and they picked the wrong guy.
Listen, I was, you know, the guy doesn't know me at all, right? And he sent me an inbox after he had put the post up. And so I just blocked him, didn't respond. Because for me, I wasn't going to give him my platform. Because if I post, then all the people that are connected to me that follow and watch what I do would be like, well, who is this? What is this? So I wasn't going to give energy to it. Like what we're doing was too important for that. But I'm so thankful that a lot of people from around the community took it upon themselves to respond to the guy and post. And I thought it was a beautiful thing, you know, to just know that people have your back. And one of the things that was so encouraging to me is that it wasn't just black people. You know, a lot of my white, you know, my life is multi-ethnic, and I don't shy away from that. I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life to building relationships that are not just black and brown people, you know, because I think for where we need to go and what we need to do in this city, it takes people coming together. And I think there's a power in that. As I mentioned earlier, you know, you look at the abolitionist movement, you look at the civil rights movement, that there's a power in people coming together. And I made the decision that I just wanted to be the type of leader, man, in this city that would bring people together, you know, and that's what I'm about. That's what I try to do in my personal life. And I want to see it happen in our churches. I want to see it happen in our city. So to see people that didn't look like me, you know, be some of the first to kind of jump on his post and kind of go at him and you know, he just tried to slander me, you know, and there's, for no reason, I don't even know him.
And that's what we need. You know, like people like you who are standing up and being voice for these issues are important. We need more people like that. And we need the people that aren't doing that to defend their character on a regular basis, because we know that these things can go wild. media can go crazy. People can have stuff in their past that they dealt with that comes up all of a sudden that's totally unrelated.
Exactly.
So I think it's important that, people fight for the character, the people standing up for these things. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think it's gonna be awesome, and I love what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And you've been doing this for years now of bringing things together, bringing unity, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-church. Like we're doing all these things, and you've fueled a lot of that in me with wanting to start the worship collective and bringing people together, and then just this heart of unity that God is doing across the nation.
That's right.
And I think it's important, and every one of us count in that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love you, bro.
Cool. Love you too, fam.
Yeah.